couple of years. Then I thought I'd better come and check on him.
Yeah, well, he's like I said, he was real happy to see you. He was telling me when I went in.
Yeah.
I
I thought sure that he was already moved.
Yeah.
Over there.
Well, he's been working at it for a long time.
Well,
moving has proved to be.
They're all new rules
Yeah.
today, and what's holding him up is that ramp.
Oh yeah, that's a big thing.
Yeah.
So actually, what I'd like to do, if you remember, I'd like to just real briefly, if you could tell me a little bit about Ed Ricketts that day that he was killed, how you happened to be down there, and what you remember seeing about it.
Well, of course, I lived at 543 Belden Street, which is right up the hill, so we could pretty well see anytime there was fires, anything down at the cannery, and I covered quite a few of the fires that were down there. And my scanner was always going, and I apparently heard a police report that there was a train accident down there with a car. So I went down, and right at that crossing that he had been going over for, I don't know how many years that he'd been down there. Well, Doc, it goes way back, a long time, and he probably knew what the schedule was on those trains. I could never figure out how come that he ever got trapped in there. But anyhow, I came out and noticed that train coming from the left side of him, because I recall that he was going up the hill. Now, I'm not absolutely sure of that, but I think that he was. And of course, the train hit him and took him on down the track and all. And when I arrived there, I went ahead and I saw that there were engineers out there, and some people start congregating. So I went up the hill a little way, and I made a couple of pictures of it. Then I went on down, and they were, by that time, they got him on a stretcher. And to me, I didn't think that he was that badly injured, but of course he probably had a lot of internal injuries. And they hauled him away to the hospital, and I don't remember now just how long he did live, but I was very much surprised and shocked that he had passed away, because I didn't think that he would. I mean, with all the accident pictures I'd taken, I'd seen other people that looked much more dangerously close to dying. But I wish that I would have known him better. I didn't, as I just didn't seem to have the occasions to go ahead and photograph him at any time, because of course he was a little different business than the sardine business when it came down to it. And I wish that I would have known him a little better, because all the stories that I heard even at that time, that he was a very interesting person. So that's about all that I know.
Well, all your experience of photographing police things and suicides and things, one of the theories or stories I've always heard that Ed Ricketts committed suicide. So do you think that was a possibility with the way that train setup was?
I don't think so, because why would he take a chance and commit suicide under those conditions when he had everything in order to commit suicide very easily? So I would never buy that story.
Yeah.
This is the first time I ever hear it.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't buy that. I mean, with all the pickling devices that he had down there, why, I'm sure that he could do a much easier thing than have a train.
Yeah. I would think so too.
Well, he wouldn't be in the car if he wanted to get killed. He could have walked up there.
Yeah. Good point.
See? So, I think you can dispel of that theory. If you find out, let me know.
Well, I don't know if we'll ever find that one out.
No, I'm sure that you won't. No. Because he could well have lived. Like I say, I thought that he wasn't that badly injured. So it had to be internally, which didn't show.
So, when did you first start photographing in Monterey?
I came to Monterey, I first came to Monterey in 1935 just to visit, because my brother was working at Del Monte Hotel. And then I went back to Wisconsin again because my brother was working out here. People from Del Monte Hotel usually went up to Lake Tahoe in the summertime and worked at what they called Tahoe Tavern, which was the biggest hotel that was up there. also owned by what I call the Big Four, you know, that was connected with the trains, and was Crocker, Fleischacker, and that group in there. And so when my brother came back to Wisconsin, then I immediately left for the West Coast again. So I went to work at Del Monte Hotel in 1936 and worked there in 1937.
What did
And
you do there?
I knew of Spike Graham's work at that time, but I didn't know Spike. But then later on, I got word that Heidrick, that A.C. Heidrick, had an opening, and I was in San Francisco at the time, but a friend down here sent me a wire and said that they were looking for somebody, and this was right after Mrs. Heidrick passed away.
Mm-hmm.
And the lady that was working there, she was going to go ahead and quit. So I started to work for Heidrick in 1938. It probably was in June or July. I don't remember for sure, because in March I was down in Florida, and then came back to Wisconsin and came out to the West Coast. So I think it had to be about in June.
Mm-hmm.
And he was probably the best photographer that I ever knew outside of Spike Graham.
So you're working as an assistant?
I was doing everything in there, because Heidrick, his wife used to do almost all the portrait work, and then of course the lady that was in there, she did the portraits after that. So I did photo finishing. Heidrick used to go ahead and have all the framing. This was before Carl Jones arrived on the picture. So I took over and learned how to do the framing, which most of the stuff was for Mr. Slevin, Carmel. And that was just about the time 35 millimeter came into the picture, and artists were using 35 millimeters. And Heidrick was taking care of that, so we took care of that part of it. And then I also learned how to use the panorama from Mr. Heidrick, because we used to do he did large groups, and I would go with him, set up the bleachers. We did all the panoramas for the conventions at Del Monte Hotel, out at the Silmar, and also up at Presidio. And then I also learned from him how to use the 5x7 Graflex and shoot pictures of the horse jumping that they had up at Presidio, on the parade ground that they had there. And then when the CCC camps came up there, I would go up there and shoot pictures of the group, both of Mr. Heidrick and myself. And then after we made the prints, we'd run on up there. I would go ahead and attempt to take orders. Either that or we'd make a bunch of pictures, sell them up there. We'd have them already. So I must have worked for Mr. Heidrick a couple of years, and then he sold out and moved to Escondido. But he sold out to Mrs. Graham, Mrs. Julian Graham, and to a fellow named Fritz Schlanze. They bought that together. And of course I went with the business. I worked with them. Well, because Mrs. Graham was not out at Del Monte anymore in order to help Spike. Spike wanted me to go to work for him, which was just the thing that I would like to have done. I could have learned so much more from Spike. But Mrs. Graham said that she was still connected with the business. She owned half the business. She says, "You're not going to work out there if you quit here." So I stayed with them, and then later on when I had a chance, wintertime there wasn't much business, so wintertime I'd take off. And as I recall, I went back to Wisconsin to see my folks and all. And then I came on out, and I went to work for McKay's, because their photo finishing, that increased quite a bit. And while I was working for McKay's, they let me go ahead and do some commercial work pretty well on the side. And I would take pictures of all the graduates at Colton School, out on the steps of the old Colton School. And then I also got into taking school pictures, the individual pictures, with a special camera. And I did the Salinas. I think the first one I did was Hartnell College. It had to be back about in 1939. Yeah. And then after that, why I did the Monterey schools, Pacific Grove schools, Salinas schools, St. Angela's schools,
I bet
Catholic
you photographed my
school.
dad.
I wouldn't be surprised if I photographed your dad. I remember photographing Lindsey Crosby over at the mission school. He was going over at the mission at that time. And these were individual pictures and also made up into class pictures. All the little individuals were put together into a class picture. So I pretty well then got out of that. I did ale and shell business because I had done their accident pictures for so long, skid marks and all that, and I could pretty well do that. You know, not when I wanted to, but I didn't have to go out there immediately and do it. Usually the cars were in the garage. The skid marks stayed there several days.
So when you started taking pictures of the cannery row, was that on your own? You started going into the canneries?
That was all on my own. Of course, living in Monterey, I was very much interested in the history. So anything that I could go ahead and get a hold of, I did. Either purchase, talk somebody out of it if I could, made prints for them. So I accumulated a lot of the stuff. I have the negatives from a fellow named Swain that were taken in 1906 of the waterfront. Fire out at Del Monte Hotel. That's the old one that they have, I believe. I think they had 2 fires. No, I don't know if that was the first or the second one, but anyhow, it goes all the way back to that time.
You have all those negatives?
I have all those negatives.
Well, I'd like to see those pictures.
And then at McKay's, working out of McKay's, we had copy camera there. They were set up all the time with the lights, and we'd photograph discharge papers and all that stuff. So I was all set up, and I could copy stuff. So any prints that I could get a hold of, I always made copies of them. And usually these prints were from people.
Sure.
And all they would want would have another print on it. And then I accumulated many pictures of the very, very old buildings. You know, a lot of them that were practically in the shape of Carmel Mission when it was about ready to deteriorate. Because when I made many copies for Mrs. Lucinian, when Dr. Harry Lucinian came into town, Mrs. Lucinian was very active, and her project was of the old buildings. And in fact, their office was one of the old adobes, which they fixed up, and building is still up there. And unfortunately, she passed away. I don't remember what year now. And then Dr. Lucinian got married to Jimmy Hatlow's wife after Jimmy Hatlow moved out to Pebble Beach. And that was the last time I saw Dr. Lucinian. I think he had retired. I saw him out there one time. So I have quite accumulation, and a lot of those pictures go all the way back of the old adobes that were taken by Slevin. Then I would also take pictures like the Stevenson house, because I had access to a very, very wide-angle lens. The old San Carlos Hotel, which was very difficult to take. I have a picture there taken with an extra wide lens. And when I would see paintings and things like over at Stevenson House, I would ask permission if I could go over there and make copies of those. So I copied a number of those things. If I knew that any buildings were going to be taken down or any changes made, I would usually on a Sunday, I would take off fairly early and I would go over to that spot because there wasn't much traffic. On the Alvarado Street, I was at the American Savings and Loan when they tore down that building in there. It was a little grocery store, and I believe there was a real estate office in there. And when they tore that building down and put in that Savings and Loan on the very corner, that would be on Pearl and Alvarado.
Mm-hmm.
That used to be a market in there. And I remember when I was working for Heidrick, Heidrick would run across the street over there because he had a radio in there and he would listen to some programs that I can recall, but I can't come up with the name of the market, a name that I knew very well.
What do you remember about the canneries and stuff?
Well, on the canneries, why, in order to take the pictures, of course, I was interested in the boats or anything of the canneries, and I wanted to do a pretty good history of them. I believe that I have pictures of the, that's not the city of Monterey, what's the other one? There was a city of Monterey, and maybe I'll come up with it. But anyhow, I think that was one of the last deck loads. It just so happened that I was going to take some pictures down there. So I took pictures of, I never did get any pictures out while they were catching them. There was one time a person could have done that. Otherwise, of course, you had to do them at night.
Yeah.
The only one I know of that had pictures of that was Spike Graham, and I think there was somebody else out there with him. I think there was a movie group. They went out there one night.
I have the movie version. There's only a few pictures of them, but not.
Yeah, it was very difficult, in order to go ahead and shoot something like that. But Spike Graham, I know, went out there, and he's the only one. So I never had anything that going out there at night. But one day, I missed out on it. Apparently, there were all kinds of sardines trapped over towards Sand City.
Mm-hmm.
And the boats had gone out, and they got their loads, and they went in there and dumped their loads, and they went right on over. When they found out they were over, they went right over there, and they set their nets, and that's where a person could have had pictures taken in the daytime. But I didn't know this until later. That's the only time I could ever remember that happening. That would have been the chance to really go ahead and get it, because those would have been taken fairly early in the morning, but in daylight.
Yeah. Remember what year that was?
No, I don't. Well, let's see. When did the sardines disappear? It had to be very close to the end. 1951.
Yeah,
so I would say so much of that stuff I was covering in 49, 50 in there. Most of the boats, the purse seiners that I took, they were taken around 46 and 47, right in there.
So did you go into the canneries?
Into the canneries, yes. Those pictures that the schools have that are made up, those sets that they could teach to the students, it actually showed the deck loads and, of course, the hoppers out there, and then how it went underneath the water and came up on the elevators. So I have pictures on the elevators. That was one of them going up as it got up, as it came on the inside and came through and hit the Fairbanks scales, which always fascinated me, how those things could travel as fast as they did. And then, of course, there was an inspector. One of the pictures was of the inspector that was there all the time. And a lot of times, let's go ahead and throw out some of the fish that came through, because there weren't all sardines in there. And sometimes people that were higher up in the canneries, they'd go on up if they wanted to have some fresh fish. At night they'd go up there and they'd pick out some of the fish that they'd want, because, they probably were cod and a little bit of everything in there. And then also shot the pictures of them with the cans when they went in there. I guess they went in there to do boiling them, or whatever you would call that process.
Steam them.
There were pictures of the machines as they operated. The line of women that were there, usually, most of them were women, but there were some fellas in the line in there.
Right.
And then, of course, they went back into the fertilizer. And, of course, the fertilizer paid much more than what the sardines did. And if they could have, I'm sure that all of them would have gone into fertilizer.
That's where the money was, that's for sure.
That's where the money was, but that's why there were quotas put on there. But now, if a load was spoiled, then they had to go into fertilizer. And word in the stories that I had heard, that quite a few loads spoiled now and then.
That's right, intentionally or not.
They always had a good excuse. They made their settings quite a way from the whistle buoy. So I don't know if there's any truth to it, but I can see that could happen there. So it was a sad day when there weren't any more sardines out there. But of course, then they started doing the squid. But I never did follow that too much. But I would see the squid boats come on in. But the only thing I did, I used to go down and take a pail early in the morning when they would come in, and they'd load up a whole pail full of them. We'd take them out. My wife and I would go down, go out salmon fishing. We had a little boat, and we'd go out to the bell buoy and the whistle buoy, and it was good bait. And I think it paid anywhere, depends where you got them, 50 cents or $1 a pail full.
Well, today the squid is the #1 fishing industry in Monterey Bay, so they're doing that right now.
Yeah, I guess they have a hard time supplying everybody with them. Yeah, calamari seems like I can't buy. I used to get some at the Price Club, and all of a sudden, the last 6 months, I haven't been able to find any there.
Well, this is the season now. They're out there right now.
Maybe they will have some.
So when were the pictures taken for the abalone? When were those?
The abalone pictures were taken before the war, so that would have been. I probably started in 1940, and then probably took most of them in 1941, the end of 1940 and then 41. And I got the pictures of course, of the abalone divers, of Rey Hattori, who was the only Nisi diver. All the rest of them that were divers came over from Japan. Mm-hmm. But and I knew it. I had known Roy because I used to play basketball with him when I first came out to California back in about 1936, 37 with Kai Miyamoto and the rest of the Japanese fellas. And I think all of the ones of Mr. Watanabe and his boat and all, because Mr. Watanabe, I believe, had two abalone boats. And they would go on usually down the coast, and they would be gone a week or 10 days at a time. And they had the mothership, and then they had the smaller boats, which didn't have any outboard motors. They had one of those scull things, I guess you'd call them, in the back, that you pull back and forth. And then they'd get the divers ready to go down, and the divers would be down there until the only time they come up is come on up to go to the bathroom. Otherwise, they'd spend the time down there. And all the abalone, of course, were taken on over to the mother boat, and they had live boxes that were out into the water, as I recall. At least this was what I was told. I never had been out there with them. But that way they would stay alive and all until they went in, and then they'd have a full deck load. Then they were all put on the deck load, and they would come on in, and they'd just be loaded with abalone. So I followed the whole process of the abalone as they came in, and took them out of the abalone shell, cut off the viscera, I believe is what they called it, went through the slicing machine, and then they were all Japanese women that worked down there that did the pounding of the abalone, and then also putting them in the boxes, scaling them, put them in the boxes, ready to ship the things out.
That cannery was on the wharf, right?
That was all down at the wharf, yes.
But that was connected with the Point Lobos?
Nothing to do with Point Lobos at all, except they fished down, usually down below Point,
Okay.
Point Lobos is where most of the abalone came from at that time.
One of your pictures has Mr. Hattori, and he's standing up and he's smoking a cigarette, and I was told that they did that.
No, Pat had mentioned that to me also. No, that wasn't true. What they did, they had the cigarette and they took the tobacco, and they would go ahead and wash the inside plate of the head plate that they put on, and that prevented it from fogging over.
With the tobacco?
It was tobacco. You know, they took the cigarette and used the tobacco on it, and I think you can check with Roy Hattori. He'll tell you the same thing. Make a note and check with him. But that is my recollection, and I'm almost positive that that is correct. Although they smoked also, you know,
Yeah.
but not because I imagine there are a lot of times when they did come up. I doubt it very much if Roy did any smoking. I don't think that he did, but I know there were other ones I've seen them smoke, like hens, in other words. But that was the reason for it that I was told.
So they put the tobacco in the helmet to keep it from fogging?
No, they washed it all off, and then when they put the helmet on, apparently that would go ahead and clear it all, and then it would stay clear, and apparently the fog did not form. This I was told. But I'm sure that you'll get an answer because he did diving for until the war broke out. And then, of course, why they impounded Mr. Watanabe's boats along with all the radios, guns, cameras.
So, do you know when did they open that cannery on the wharf, the abalone cannery?
Well, it wasn't. I don't think you'd call it a cannery.
No, but yeah, the process.
Oh, I don't know. I think that was there. Gee, I wouldn't be surprised that was there when I first came.
Yeah, sure.
I think that, I'm sure that they did that way back.
Yeah, well, they've been since the turn of the century, but the abalone. I mean, at Point Lobos, and then they opened the other one in Monterey.
Yeah, I'm sure Pop Ernst didn't go on out there and get them. I'm sure they brought them in for Pop Ernst. But at that time, of course, these people could go out and had no problem. There were so many of them that you didn't have to go out far. It was later on that they had to go out there, and so many people drowned over at Moss Landing and all. The tide would go ahead and get them. They would venture out too far because there weren't that many abalone. They were pretty well fished out. And of course, as time went on, they had the size limit put in there. And I guess there were only certain abalone that you could go ahead and get. If you were red, what was the red abalone? And I remember over at Moss Landing that the Fish and Game used to go ahead and park way up above with their telescope, and they would go ahead and watch, and then they would pick these people up as they were coming back to their cars and all. Because I got to know some of the fellas Fish and Game and all, and I know that there was a lot of people were more or less poaching at that time when it was getting difficult to get. But it was after I left that the prices went up, and I was always amazed when somebody would tell me, come on over to Jackson and tell me that, do you know that an abalone feed now cost you $19.95? And I understand now you're lucky to find it for $30 if you can get it.
I reckon it's like $55 some places now.
How much?
$55 a pound.
Is that right? Oh,
sometimes it's and now
No.
all the abalone is grown commercially in these.
Well, I
farms.
was going to ask you, how did it ever work out? I had read about they were going to start that out at Moss Landing.
Well, there's one in Santa Cruz that's very successful.
Oh, is that right? And the Moss Landing one didn't work out?
As far as I know, there's the one in Moss Landing didn't. It may be the same company that moved to Santa Cruz, and they started in Monterey at one time too, where the aquarium is now. There was.
At Hovden?
After Hovden's closed and it was empty, some people started a abalone cannery or abalone industry down there, and then there's one in Hawaii too, I think, now. But the one in Santa Cruz is very successful.
Is that right?
Yeah. That's really, and their thing is they grow the small abalones and they sell them to the restaurants for.
Well, I think most of the last abalone that I knew of after the war, because Watanabe, Mr. Watanabe, and the Japanese, I don't think any of them ever went back to that anymore. Because Roy Hattori, why, I guess during the war, why he learned how to repair watches and clocks and stuff. I think in the service it must have been. And then he worked at a jewelry shop here. I don't know if you can find that out from him. I know that he worked at one of the jewelers down there. If he was in business with a jeweler, I don't know. Mm-hmm. But that was his business. And then his brother, he had gone back to the Midwest. Now, I don't know if the whole family. You might inquire that from Roy, because it ended up that Tash. I believe he went to University of Wisconsin, and of course he is the head of radiology up at the hospital and has been for many years. Mm-hmm. Now you can ask Roy about that. He can give you because these, of course, were stories that I heard later on. I think I only talked to Tash once after that.
So, what do you remember about Pop Ernst's restaurant?
I really didn't know much about Pop Ernst when I first came here. I had never been in there to eat or anything. I was more acquainted with Carl and Ernie. I believe it was Ernie. Now, I thought that I took pictures of Carl or Ernie. I can remember Carl, that he would go in for a dip every day, I think, completely around the year. And usually he went on over there at the new wharf, just the other side. Well, I guess that became a little beach over there, swimming beach. I believe later on I guess they got to be the beach because I think they had toilets and stuff there. But he went in swimming every day. This was his constitutional, I guess. And then he was the waiter. That I do know, up in there. And Ernie, I guess, he helped run the business there. So and Pop, I don't know when he passed away, but I think he must have passed away either just before that I started that abalone series.
Yeah.
But I didn't know him.
But did you go into the restaurant and remember the?
Yes, the one picture, why I thought they should go ahead and they fixed abalone, and I took a picture of the way it was presented. And then I had two people, from out of town, and had them as guests there, and they were served abalone. I thought that would sort of finish up the story. And then, of course, by the time I got all through and got those and got the pictures of the jewelry that was made out of the abalone shells, and got the picture of all the shells as they were dumped over there in the sand, and then later on the sand covered over them. I'm sure that there must be thousands of them underneath those sand dunes over there. Someday somebody will find them.
What sand dunes are those?
Out toward Sand City.
Okay.
And that's where the jewelry shop was, as I recall, back in there. So I took a number of pictures of the jewelry and the lamps. They made lamps and things like that, and they made soup tureens out of them, and then of course they start selling the shells. So I don't know if the ones that are out there are still any good. If somebody runs into them, he'll have a pile of shells. But by the time I got through, I thought that Life magazine would be interested. And I contacted them, and they said that they were. So I bundled them up with a little story and all with it, and I sent it back to Life magazine, and with my type of luck, the war broke out, and it had to be with Japan. So and came back to me with a nice letter saying that they were not interested at this particular time.
Oh, that's too bad.
That was the end of that. But probably a good thing that I did have the pictures of them and all. I used to, after Mr. Heidrick left and Fritz Schlunze and Mrs. Graham took over the business, I used to run the panorama circuit camera. At that time, the Japanese society that they had, when anybody died, they went over to their church, and there would always be a panorama made of the whole group there. As I recall, they always ordered 2 panoramas. One apparently stayed with the family, which I was told. One would go to Japan. And Heidrick had all of these negatives of these panoramas. And then also I had ones when I took the panoramas for the people I was working for. Now, it ended up that I had most of those negatives, and at one time I inquired from the Japanese society if they were interested in those things, and they weren't. So I haven't seen those things, so I don't know now if I don't think I gave them to Pat. They could have been tossed out because a lot of those were nitrate and very explosive. But nobody was interested in it, so they well could have been finally tossed out. Of course, I have other ones that are nitrate. The ones at Swain were nitrate.
Yeah. So, do you remember in this particular industry of the dangers? Were divers killed in doing this?
Never any while I was around. No.
Okay.
See, now they were not deep sea when it comes right down to it.
No.
They were near shore.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, all the pictures that you have, the ones that I have, those were all taken out by Lover's Point, right?
Oh yes, this was just sort of and so I could go ahead and get pictures of the mother boat, and they weren't going to go ahead and run all the way, down. And we did want a little sea atmosphere.
Oh, I see. They set these up for you.
And that one picture where Ted McKay went ahead and took a picture. He had his rollie out there, so he came on out, and he shot pictures of there's one of me standing up in the boat,
right.
and Mr. Watanabe is handling the oars in there, and it was a pretty rough day, and I'm surprised that that I wasn't the one that went in, but I was a little more agile those days. But yeah, they were taken there, and unfortunately, it was a pretty rough day that we took those. But that way, they could bring the boat out there, and I could get all those pictures of Roy. That showed all the equipment that they used. That's where one of those pictures had all the equipment.
Yeah. And did you number? One of them was numbered with all the numbers.
Yeah, they were all numbered. Yeah. And then Roy identified them, and I suppose he could still identify them. So I probably, I'm sure that I have that stuff someplace, but I've got so much stuff, and I moved into a mobile home. It's a large one, but 24 by 60, but nevertheless, I accumulated so many things, and.
Well, I'm glad that you have all that stuff, though.
Yes. I had 2 bound volumes of all the game and gossip. Well, actually, it was What's Doing magazine, because I was the official photographer when Nash and what's the name of the fellow that started the restaurant down the coast?
Gallatin?
No, the one that's still down there. The one that the movie stars went to, probably owned down there. Why can't I come with it? Starts with an F. Frank Nash and what other restaurant do you know down there?
Well, in Big Sur area?
Yeah.
When the Nepenthe and.
That's it, Nepenthe.
Oh, okay.
You know who started it?
Oh, I can't remember his name too. Now I do know. He and his family.
Pat brought it up yesterday. And, well, he and Frank Nash, they started the What's Doing magazine, and it came out in about a 6x8 to 5x7 to start with, and I think there were only about 2 or 3 issues, and then Bruce Harris got into it, and that's when he went to the bigger one, and Bruce made covers and all. That's when Bruce started in. But Bruce had all the issues and had them all bound. And at the time, all the issues that I had, I gave to Bruce, and which started from number 1, going up to when I left, I guess 68, right about in there, 65, 68. So I had 4 bound volumes, of which last time I was here, I gave them to Bruce because he lost both sets. Unfortunately, he had both of them in the fire. Yeah. And I was, of course, going to keep them for my daughter, and she suggested that Bruce, with his larger family and all, that with the children, it would be much better for him to have it.
You know, the Monterey Library has all of them too.
Well, do they have?
Oh yeah, they have every one.
A bound set.
Yeah, and all bound.
Yeah, well, they were the same ones. Yeah,
I was looking for your Japanese on this for that particular issue, and I found it.
Oh.
And
yeah, well, that was just sort of a story, an issue that they took maybe 5 pictures,
yeah,
four or five pictures, something like that, and Bruce made the story.
We didn't do them justice, but yeah, they were there, and I think it was like 1948 or 49.
I guess it just made a nice story and all at that time. So, but I would photograph paintings. Of course, there were a lot of artists, and Bruce was in with the artist crowd, so there were a lot of the pictures made of Varda over at the Red Barn. I remember taking pictures. I have a picture of that Red Barn from the outside, and also
of the Red Barn?
Of the inn. Over on Hawthorne, just before you get over to Reeside, isn't it Hawthorne? It runs parallel to Lighthouse. Mm-hmm. And the one on the left-hand side, all painted red in there, the barn. Well, Varda is the one that redid that whole thing, and Mrs. Varda, she had a kiln inside there, and he was an artist. And yeah, we did a story on that because he built a big fireplace hearth that was in there, as I recall, and that's in Game and Gossip. So there were a lot of buildings that we did, and of course we did the story of Jimmy Hatlow when he still lived over next to the La Playa, La Playa or Pine Inn, before he moved on over to Pebble Beach.
Jimmy Hatlow was?
Jimmy Hatlow was the one that had Little Iodine and the cartoonist, yeah.
What do you remember, real briefly, about some of the fires down on Cannery Row?
Well, I don't know. I think I might have had some picture of the Hovden when they had the fire. There were quite a number of them, and not so many when they were canning sardines. But after the sardines left, there were quite a few fires down there. I do have pictures of, was it Calpac? No, it wasn't Calpac. It was the one that the mayor, not Rousseau, who was the mayor before that? I was thinking about him yesterday. Well, my memory's going. He was the mayor during the Centennial, and I have pictures of him with Governor Warren when that came on in. But he was connected with that camera. They had an explosion there. I know I have pictures of that, and some of the other fires in there I would have in my records. But there were quite a few fires after the sardines were gone, and I remember going down the firehouse one day down on Hawthorne, for some reason in order to see when the firemen about something or other, and finally they came in and they had been down. They almost made daily checks down Cannery Row, and he had a particular device that day they had picked up down there. There were very unusual devices, always newer ones coming out, where they could go ahead and have a fire go off many, many hours after. But I guess a lot of them were never proved that they were started. Now, most of the equipment, as I recall, went to Africa. I think some of it went to South America, but the word that I had that most of that equipment that was in there went to canneries in Africa. I would say that somebody connected with the cannery would know more about it, but that is what I remember.
Yeah, a lot of it did. I know that the Hovden stuff, of course, Hovden stayed open till '72.
They were the last one.
And a lot of that stuff is still operating in Sand City now, where they're canning sardines again over there.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
At Sand City?
Davy, the Davy family, they have a company. They can sardines. They're making a fish protein product, but they also are canning sardines again.
How are they catching the sardines? Some of the smaller boats?
The boats, yeah, the ones here in Monterey. They're from Monterey Bay.
I mean, no purse seiners anymore.
No, there aren't any more purse seiners, but with the
well, there are purse seiners. I've seen them,
but not here in Monterey anymore.
Well, no, up in Seattle area, and then I saw some in Alaska when I went to Alaska in 1958.
Yeah, unfortunately, there aren't any here in Monterey. There should be, I think, but yeah, here's canning sardines. He gives me cases of them for our school programs that we do, and we give them to kids and have them taste sardines from Monterey Bay.
Well, that would be a specialty item today.
It is, yeah. I don't know where he sells them because I've never seen them in the local stores. But if I would have thought about it, I would have brought you a can of them.
Yeah, I know I didn't care to go ahead and eat the squid that they put out at that time. They had the ink and everything in there, and I understand all that went on to Asiatic countries.
Yeah.
I know I had some friend one day that went on down there, some younger friend of my wife, and came back up, and I guess somebody down there had given them some of those cans. We opened one, and it was like pouring ink out of it, and I thought, but in fact I inquired, who's buying that? And I was told that all of that went to Asiatic countries. Apparently, that's the way they can, or did at that time.
And they still do
over there. Oh, is that right?
They still can squid and stuff. Yeah, it's still a pretty big business. But today, the squid market, again, like you said, it's restaurant things and calamari.
Oh yeah, stuff is all cleaned and frozen. I mean, that's the way I buy it. Although
but
my daughter,
you can still get canned squid.
That's right. When my daughter has come over here, now I'm talking about 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years ago, she would go ahead and pick some up, and then she would clean them, and she would have to clean out the ink sacks and all.
Yeah.
But not me. Go ahead and buy them all frozen. Yeah, that surprised me. I didn't know that they were canning anymore, but I would assume that they, like everything else, they put a quota on it.
Oh, yeah.
And they're probably going on with the old Lampera, is that what they call Lampera type boats that they first had before the purse seiners came
Yeah,
out?
pretty much. The difference today is, of course, evidently the sardines are making a comeback into the bay. And they caught like 2 million pounds worth last year. But the problem with the sardine industry, of course, there is no real big market for it anymore. It's a pretty inexpensive fish, so they're not making any money, really.
Yes, but so was everything else was inexpensive fish.
That's right. Noticed, yeah.
Look at the salmon.
That's right.
And of course, the last time that my wife and I went out fishing with our boat before we left, she caught the biggest fish, 45-pound salmon, which were very unusual.
Yeah.
And the biggest one I ever had was a 33-pounder, so she beat me by plenty.
Right here in Monterey Bay?
Yes, but I got mine when they had the Derby, and I won a 9x9 tent, I remember, at that time.
What did you win?
the 9x9 tent is what I won. She didn't win anything because they didn't have the derby at that time. But yes, they did have some kind of a derby, but they had it only with a fishing boat. You had to be out with a fishing boat, and I believe the first prize was a trip to go down to Mexico. A week of fishing down Mexico, as I recall. And the only thing my wife got, I remember I took it on over to the old wharf to have it weighed over there. And boy, just about stopped every one of those old-time fishermen in there, because it was quite a while since they saw one that size in there. My wife won a Shenley rod, because they had some pictures that we had sent in, and she got a letter, and they sent her a rod on it. But we were not included because we didn't catch it off one of the fishing boats, and that we went out in our own boat. Then we took it on over to Monk Lanero. Well, Monk wasn't there, but the place next to him, they quick froze it. And they still had a cannery up in San Francisco. At that time, they were doing individual canning. Took it up there. Had some of it firm smoked,
yes.
and others kippered and canned. Had it all done up there.
I was to ask you about Gallatin's restaurant down there. What do you remember about that?
Well, the only thing that I know that when I got word about the shooting that was down there, murder that was down there, why I grabbed my camera and hopped in the car and I tore on down that coast. I believe at the time I had put a seatbelt in my car. That was before seatbelts. And at that time, they used to wreck these cars over in Salinas. We had a wrecking yard over on Del Monte. And I went out there one day and I says, how can you guys go ahead and smash up all these automobiles like that without getting hurt? And he showed me the seat belts that they had. And what they had, they were from World War airplanes, and they had those great big wide seats, and they had those installed in their cars. So I went ahead in the war surplus store and I got one of those, and I had it installed before I made a trip in 1952 when I went back to Wisconsin, because our daughter was only about 6, 7. And the three of us sat in the front seat, and we had a seatbelt all the way across there. And I had that on, and I put that thing on when I went down the coast. And I got down there, and of course, I don't think Sheriff McCoy was down there yet. And I had got pictures of the people that were down there. And as I recall, I think 2 of them got outside. What they had, they were Filipinos that were in there, and they had a bunkhouse, which is down underneath Gallatin's, as I recall. And they used to play cards. And maybe you remember the fellow's name. I have
Lavinia,
a record of it, but I don't remember it now.
It was Lavinia.
But yeah, it sounds very close to it. But apparently he thought that he was cheated, and they had a .22 rifle there, and for sport they used to go ahead and shoot at the seagulls and stuff out there. I don't know if they ever hit any, but they probably did. And that was a sport that they had. Well, apparently he went ahead and took this gun and went on the outside, or he reenacted. I was there when he reenacted for Sheriff McCoy. When he finally caught him, they didn't catch him until I think they caught him up at Walnut.
Yes, I know in California.
Well, yeah, it's on the Salinas River just before you get on into Sacramento. It's coming on down from Sacramento. Walnut Grove?
Yeah, I think
Is there Walnut Grove? Yeah, I've been through that area for many years. But they finally picked him up, what, a year and a half later, as I recall, something like that. And of course, they all went down there with a court reporter, and that's when I have a picture of Sheriff McCoy when this fellow went through the whole thing. But anyhow, he pretty well, I think he was still inside, and a couple of guys got out. They were trying to get away. They probably were already shot, but got on the outside, and he finished them off, and then he turned around and he hitchhiked, as I recall now. into Monterey. Because I think somebody came up and said something about that they had given this guy a ride. And I would assume that he took a bus down the old Greyhound bus station and left town. I don't know, but I would assume that happened. So that was a story of that, but that was quite something. There were 5, was it? 5 or 6?
Yeah, I think it was 5.
I think it was 5.
Yeah.
It was already called. It's possible it was 6, but I think it was 5. So, yeah, that was quite a deal.
They didn't do much for their business either.
Well, yeah, Gallatin's, of course, it wasn't long after that why they got out of the business there, and then they opened up in Pete Brenning's, where Pete Brenning lived, and Mrs. Brenning, in the old Adobe there. Right now, I don't even remember the name of the Adobe. You probably remember that.
Yeah, it's not the Stokes, but it's right across from there.
Yeah, see, it was Jimmy Costello, his mother. What? No. Let's see, did they have the same dad? I don't remember now anymore. But anyhow, they were half brothers, Pete Brenning and Jimmy Costello. I think they had the same dad, but I'm not sure.
Any good photographs of sports, sporting things in Monterey, sporting events, baseball?
No, I went over, the Seals that used to come on down and at the old baseball diamond. I went over there one time and shot some pictures. Goldie Goldstein, later on was in the sheriff's department. Why, he was very, very much connected with that when they came on down. I remember that I shot some pictures there one time, going way back with some of the fellows from the Seals that came down, but I didn't cover much of that because the newspapers, up in San Francisco, they came down and covered a lot of that stuff, and so I didn't. There was too many other things that I was covering. But let's see, any other sports that went on? No. McKay's actually shot some pictures of when they first started in with their Photoshop there, and that's when I came in town and I played on the Monterey team up at the high school. A few games. I believe they shot some pictures when we had a touring girls group that came through. And of course, for record, I'll go ahead and say we beat them. but I'm not sure. But it was Kai Miyamoto, Archie Miyamoto.
This was basketball or baseball?
Basketball. I used to play basketball in Wisconsin.
Whereabouts in
See,
Wisconsin?
that's when 6'2" was tall.
Yes, right.
One of the tallest. And in fact, I did play a very short time. I played professional basketball.
Oh, really?
Up in Sheboygan, Wisconsin, with the Redskins. I went ahead and I played probably 4 minutes against the old Knickerbocker team. And the old timers will know of a fellow by the name of Joe Lapchick. And I'm sure he outweighed me because I don't think I weighed over about 149 pounds, 155 pounds. Went down at the backboard and he came down with elbows and I had a cut right over the eye that was bleeding, and that was it. That was my total there.
Well, basketball's a non-contact sport.
It wasn't like the sport it is today, that's for sure.
How old were you when you did that?
Well, let's see. I started right after high school. I was 18, 19.
You follow it today?
19. Yes, I didn't for quite a long time. I do go follow it now, but it's a completely different sport at all, and it's completely too rough. Maybe it's more for the spectator. See, at that time, basketball score would be 24 to 28. If anybody scored over 35, 39 points, why, it was a runaway. But at that time, you couldn't go ahead and take 2, 3, 4 steps to the basket. And now you take guys 7 foot long, they can go from the center almost in order to go in there to dunk. There was never anybody that ever dunked at that time. But being from Kohler, Wisconsin, why, we had a Kohler team, and we had a recreation hall that had very, very high ceilings. Now, some of the places we played, why, you could never have an art shot. These are out in the country, and it wasn't high enough, you hit the ceiling.
Whereabouts is that? I've been to Wisconsin.
Well, have you ever used any Kohler plumbing fixtures?
Sure. Oh, okay, that's.
Well, right now, that recreation hall is Kohler has made that into showrooms, and they have a wall of china. And someday it's on TV, and you'll see it in some of the higher class magazines. The wall of china. Now, this ceiling would be probably, guessing, 30 feet high, something like that. They have toilets, one on top of the other, all the way to the top of the ceiling. And then they have other ware all the way to the ceiling. That's all across this wall. And that's why they call it the Wall of China. And that's part of their advertising in there. And the young, the young Kohler that is running the company now has very good ideas. And they put in a golf course at Kohler now, and he took up golf, and he plays at the old Crosby tournament the last 2 years. Why, Herbert V. Kohler has been out here. Now, how he got to play, I don't know, but apparently he's on the inside. But they went ahead and they've put in a golf course, which is one of the best in the country right now. And in 1937, they're going to have the women's women's U.S. Open in Kohler. Where they're going to put them, I don't know. But they do have a 5-star hotel there, and now in June they will go ahead and they will have a 60-unit high-class motel with room to increase it for another 60.
So is that down by Minneapolis, anywhere in that?
No, 57 miles north of Milwaukee.
Oh, okay. I was in the other.
Right out of Sheboygan, 4 miles from the lake. Sheboygan is on the lake. That's where I was born, in Sheboygan, and then at an early age I moved to Kohler. I was born 1914. 21 we moved to Kohler.
In the in the military? Were you in the Army and Navy during World War II?
No, I was in Monterey at the time working for McKay's, and I had a very low number. And I'm sure that I probably would have gone to the Solomon Islands, because a lot of the people, when I was still at McKay's, went to the Solomon Islands. And in fact, we sold some of those sergeants, McKay's did, sold them a lot of photographic materials that they took along in order to take pictures. And I was 1A and had a very low number, as I said. And but I had come up with some high blood pressure when they had the assembly line, and also I had eardrums that had been perforated and rehealed and all. Although, as I recall, when I went through the line, remember the doctor checked my ears, he called other doctors over there to take a look at these ears, which are a little unusual. It was like a drum that had been punctured and then healed, and then punctured and then healed again. But that had nothing to do, I'm sure, with me finally ending up with 4F. But what they did, because of the high blood pressure, they sent me to San Luis Obispo to see a regional doctor. I guess that was their system at that time. So I went on down there, and he gave me a real good checkup. And they paid for me going down around a bus. And he says, why don't you? We got talking, and I was interested in museums, stuff like that, being in Monterey, and he was too. He said, why don't you go up to the museum? You got a lot of stuff up there. And then in a couple hours, come on back, and I'll go in and I'll check your blood pressure, everything again. So he checked me all over again, and then I said, well, how did I do? He said, well, I'll make out the report. and I'll send it in. And maybe in about 2 weeks or so, I got orders that I was 4F. So my brother had come on out to work with me at McKay's at the time, and he had been kidding me, about going into service earlier, and it ended up why he went in. I've got pictures of him leaving in the train in Monterey with a lot of the other people that I knew in Monterey. So I was 4F, and everybody was pretty well taken into the service. So I decided to go ahead and I would get into something, and I went up to Seattle. And put the word around that I was doing, was a photographer and all. And then one day I went ahead and, I went back home to Kohler first to see my mother. And then I got a call that I could have a job doing camouflaging Boeing plant. They were camouflaging Boeing plant. So I came on out. They were paying $25 an hour for the guys camouflaging. That was big money. But when I came out, they finished it. And the guy had made so much money that he decided he wasn't going to work for a while. He was going to spend it. But then I got a call from a fellow that I knew that I bought some photographic supplies. He said they're looking for a photographer in the flight test unit. So I went over and I saw this fellow by the name of Woods, and I was hired in the flight test unit. And I was in on the development of all the flight testing of B-17s and the B-29. And one member of our group was killed when the first B-29 crashed. Now that word was circulated in the PI, the newspaper, in Seattle, but not around the country. They kept that all quiet. But it did put the airplane back at least a year, because Eddie Allen, for one, he was probably the world's most noted flight test. In fact, they brought him down to do the consolidated flight testing, an airplane Consolidated put on. I remember that. Now, at the time when they crashed into Fry Packing House and killed so many people in there, and of course everybody on the B-29, I had come down south, and I was in Southern California with a B-17 with a crew. And we had a little office that was there that we used at the time when we were doing the testing. And Alan Reed was the second pilot. Alan Reed was the second pilot. And he happened to be on the phone when I was in that room, and I could look up at him, and all of a sudden it looked like practically all the blood drained from his face. And I thought, gee, there's something. Now, he would have been on that airplane if we hadn't been down south.
Oh.
Well, and I saw that he was very, very serious, and right after he hung up, he called all the fellows who was in the flight crew there. We were called guinea pigs. And he called us all together, and then he told us what had happened up in there. So I was over at Edwards Air Force Base, which was there at the time, but where all the Liberators, and before that there were some B-17s, well, that was a training base mostly for Liberators at Muroc, which was right adjacent to Edwards. And that was when I saw my first jet plane. Never had a good look at it, because by the time I'd climb out of the airplane, the thing was gone. And I believe that was one that Lockheed was building at the time. But it was a very interesting job that I had up there. Anything, and I was always very lucky. That's why I'm still here. I was slated on the flight. It was dive test with the B-17. I was slated on that flight, but I never went to work, and I was in the afternoon shift. I didn't have to go to work till 1:30, and we happened to have some good weather, and somebody else went on that flight in the morning. And the dive test, the elevator came off, and they lost the airplane. or I would have had my wish of coming down to parachute. I always wanted to come out under those circumstances. Everybody survived.
Oh.
So then I was scheduled on the next one, and you can see how my luck ran. They went, engineers did a lot of work on the airplane. I was on the next one. We went through all the dive tests. We had one more to do. While we were climbing up, in order to do that last one, number 3 engine went out, and we were hoping to be all done. We had to go back to the field, and by the time we got back, there was around dinner time, so I went out to dinner, and when I got back, I had a note in order to go ahead and do some photographing. I thought down on the airplane, so I thought, well, gee, I guess they got the the motor. What went haywire on the motor? I went down there, and the inspector says, "Here, take a look." One more dive, and the elevator would come on off. There were these particular type of bolts they had in there. So, and the next one I didn't go on. For some reason, I wasn't scheduled on. So I've been very, very fortunate.